Good evening. I'm Milton Curry, Dean of the USC School of Architecture and the Della and Harry McDonald Dean's Chair in Architecture. And I'm thrilled to welcome all of you to our Fall 2021 Public Event Series. It's great to have all of our students back, our staff, and our faculty at our school here in Los Angeles, and we're very excited to welcome you with us from all around the world to our public event series that begins this evening. So welcome. I hope all of you are doing well. The USC School of Architecture, a premier global design school that is profession-focused and socially engaged, has been and continues to be a place of invention and innovation. And in light of the past 18 months, our school has emerged even more diverse and more committed to matching design excellence with social impact. Our design studios, curriculum, and nearly every aspect of our research and outreach activities are aligned with the twin goals of maintaining academic and design excellence, with increasing the relevance and impact of what we are teaching and what we are disseminating as new knowledge. Our public event series is evidence of this. This fall, we will explore the variety of ways the creative or creator economies are interpreted by those on the front lines of architecture, community activism, and real estate development globally. I urge you to join us for each and every one of these events, including an exhibition co-sponsored by the USC School of Architecture and the California African American Museum that features artist Latoya Ruby Frazier's groundbreaking photography show, The Last Cruise, which will be accompanied by a series of conversations on labor and civil rights throughout the run of the show. Next week, we will have Raul Marotta lecturing from Harvard University. And again, I urge you to join us for all of the incredible insights that you'll gain from our lectures and public events. Please register for all of these through the USC School of Architecture website. Just 1 year ago, we began our Asia Cities and Latin America's Cities Initiatives Conversations. And today we begin our public event series with another stellar lineup of leaders to explore the work that is happening all across Asia. According to the latest report from the United Nations, the global population in 2018 was 7.6 billion, and the urban population was 4.2 billion. By 2050, the global population will reach 9.7 billion, and 68% of the population, roughly 6.6 billion, will live in urban areas. Of the largest 22 cities experiencing population growth of more than 2 million, 15 of those 22 were located in Asia. Our school's Asia Cities initiative aims to catalyze new thinking on Pan-Asian urbanism and urban issues such as planetary warming, urbanization's impact on poverty, implications of supply chain formation on urban form, and in this post-COVID world, the issues of the disposition of cultural, retail, and commercial space in cities. Is culture, broadly speaking, actually being democratized? And is neoliberalism and notions of the creator or creative economy even useful at this point in late capitalism? What is the appropriate role of the state in infrastructure and financing urban development? Through our school's Asia Cities initiative, we want to lean into these issues with this panel, but also with our student-led and faculty-led research and global studies program. Therefore, this evening, we've assembled some of the region's most accomplished professionals into dialogue with us to talk about these and other topics. And I'm really pleased to have this extraordinary panel with us this evening. I'm going to introduce them briefly, and then we'll start with their presentations. Li Hu is founding partner of Open and visiting professor at Tsinghua University and Central Academy of Fine Arts, China. Open was founded in New York City with the Beijing office established in 2008. Prior to Open, Li was the partner of Stephen Hall Architects and director of Columbia University's Studio X in Beijing. Li received his B.Arch from Tsinghua University in Beijing in 1996 and his M.Arch from Rice University in 1998. Welcome. Lyndon Neary is part of Neary and Hu, a design office and research office that he founded with partner Rosanna Hu in Shanghai. Mr. Neary received his Master of Architecture from Harvard University and a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture at the University of California at Berkeley. Welcome. Vanessa Chung is the Group Managing Director of Nanfeng Development Limited, managing the group's Hong Kong property division, and founder of The Mills, a revitalization project transforming the Nanfeng textile mills into a global innovation textile destination in Hong Kong. Ms. Chung obtained her Master in Landscape Architecture from Harvard University and a Bachelor's in Molecular and Cell Biology from the University of California at Berkeley. Welcome, Vanessa. Bryant Liu is Vice Chairman of Ronald Liu and Partners, where he has overseen the growth of the architectural practice to over 600 across Hong Kong, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shanghai, and Shenzhen. Bryant received his B.Arch from Cornell University, and we're proud to claim him as a recent member of our school's Board of Counselors and generous supporter of some of our Asia initiatives. Welcome, Bryant. And finally, last but not least, Sean Chow, President of AECOM Asia Pacific, overseeing AECOM's strategic growth and business operations in Greater China, Southeast Asia, Australia, and New Zealand, including more than 12,000 employees. Sean has a Master of Architecture from the University of California, Berkeley, and a Master of Architecture in Urban Design from Harvard University Graduate School of Design. In the order outlined, in the order that I introduced our speakers, they will speak for about 7 minutes, followed by an open discussion moderated by myself, and then we'll take questions from you through the chat, through the Q&A function, to have an open discussion for the remainder of our time together this evening. So thank you all again for coming. Thank our speakers, and I want to start by giving the floor over to Mr. Li Hu. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Curry, for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm going to take the very intense, short 7 minutes. I don't know if I can do it. I'd like to share some of my, I guess I could call it discovery or experience in the last 10 years working on some of the urban cultural institutional works in China. Something different from my past experience working in the States or Europe on similar projects. I will give it a title called The Design Before the Design. What I mean by that is, I remember working on similar kind of project in the States that you have to follow exactly what the design brief was given to you. But often I found while working in China that we have the opportunity, and I also feel the urgency to be very actively involved in almost redesigning and questioning of the design brief you were given. And by redesigning this design program, the programs of the thing, or by redesigning the thing that you're going to design, there's a chance and possibility to make it much more interesting, and make it more sustainable, make the building more sustainable in its future operation, both socially and economically, and to make the building more inclusive, or in another way, more open. So I'm going to take the, I don't know how many minutes past now, the rest 5 minutes to go through 2 examples for today's talk. The 2 projects. The first one is a theater in the city of Shenzhen, which we did, and we spent 6 years doing it. Like many of new theaters built in the last 20 years in China, is more often is in a urban conditions, more like tabula rasa, as a new district. And look at these diagrams on the right side. We research some of the new theater being built in China. No matter how crazy the forms look, it's essentially a very simple program inside. A mono program, a giant auditorium, basically, made for opera house, sometimes for concert. I want to rather take this thing differently, first to return to a modest, much more modest form. But more importantly, instead of a typical Western theater like program, how could we add things to it? So what we did is to fit inside this very contained box of 80 meters square, rather low profile, programs such as the restaurants, cafe, bar, and the shops, which not only provide the services during the breaks of the theater performance, but also to help to offset the running cost. And very importantly, we turn those rehearsal spaces and add a bit more to be a program that is open to the public to experience the performing art. And then gardens. So all this together to make it a rather a box is drama. That's why we call it drama box. And here you can see how intense internally this box contains different sort of programs rather than just a typical theater. So as you move around the building, you can see how it's much more alive and active around to see through the program. Of course, it has this the main program with the opera house, but also you have a much easier to run kind of black box theater and all the other programs that are open to the public. And also more importantly is the kind of gesture and the attitude the building has towards its neighbors and the community and the people passing by. For instance, you can take a nap here, under this theater, which is unimaginable in most the urban theaters to even have a space like that. And then the building opens up and draws you in, as you see, you can go up the steps on this side of the building and to have this promenade through all the spaces that is outdoor, and eventually leads you up to a surprising landscape on the top. And this photograph shows you how active a theater can be, rather than just a object in the city more often. And then 2 years ago, yes. about 2 years ago, we were invited to do a building in the city of Yantai, which is a coastal city, very beautiful place, by the sea. And our design brief in this case was even simpler. It was just called a landmark. So we were asked to do a landmark. That even funnily, they were. I think the client was intrigued by the vessel in the Hudson Yard. So let's do something like that to attract tourists and tourism. An empty landmark in this sculptural form is no other function than than the outlook. Is of course is the something that I think they were looking for, but I think it will be a wasteful opportunity. And instead, on my first trip to the city, which is a new district, vast land of mostly housing, factories, and people bored with no cultural life and nothing really to do after work. And we mapped the existing cultural facility in the city, in the old city and the new city, and you can see how scarce the facilities are. So naturally, I start in the early sketches to think this landmark no longer empty, but rather injected with a theater, a exhibition space, and a library. So how can we do a landmark actually infill with all these much more active urban cultural spaces? And then the building itself is a something that can connect us to nature. But in making the cultural institutions, now seeing the failure of many, failure in terms of not being operated actively, and almost like empty shell cultural buildings. In this case, I was thinking that let's try a very light institution. So it's a library and the exhibition space that doesn't rely on a huge subsidy to take on this program for the daily operation, and the theater that will be outdoor, and the exhibition digital. So we began with a very simple idea that let's make a digital museum and a small library, which also be part of the indoor performing space. And I will not expand into the idea that how this building is a shape that's formed by the light and how it relates to the cosmos, and and then become a really instrument to make all these natural phenomena into a daily ritual, bringing back to the urban experience. I'm quickly go through some of the images. That the outdoor theater, which also facing directly to the rising sun of the summer solstice. And then these are some of the images of the space inside the exhibition space that work with the big data visualized to become a changing exhibition. The library, I can see the library space. On top of that will be a just empty void of a spiritual space that you will be just experiencing the changing phenomena of nature. Buildings under construction looks like so far is the most difficult project to build from our experience. So hopefully we'll be sharing with you more images soon, 2 years from now. I think that will summarize my presentation today. Thank you all. Lyndon, hi. Maybe did I use less than 7 minutes, perhaps? I hope.
This opportunity to thank Dean Curry for inviting me and us to this panel discussion. I'm going to address some of the issues we face today practicing in Asia, honing in on China and more specifically Shanghai, where I live and where our practice is based. There are a number of local conditions that we have to quickly grapple. You may find the following an oversimplification of perhaps what I call the China condition that Lee had mentioned a while ago, but for expediency and clarity, let me share with you these examination things that we have to deal with. Inheriting the remnants of China's industrial heritage. Obviously, this also brings an opportunity to reutilize artifacts of access through adaptive reuse. Reuse not so much from a profit point of view. We're not developers, but adaptive reuse from a point of survival, given the budget that's given to us, often by clients, which is not a lot. We try to convince them to deal with existing condition, confronting urban issues, which are rapid development and demolition, and confronting rural issues, disappearing village. I think Dean Curry had talked about the idea of the condition and the urban condition that we live with today. First, I want to talk about the adaptive reuse and dealing with excess. This is the context in which our practice Near and Who intentionally situates itself. As a practice, we are constantly trying to insert meaning into our work by drawing from these contexts, both in terms of geography and from a historical point of view. So many of our projects fall under this category of adaptive reuse and deal with local history and heritage. In much of our work, there is the recurrent theme of juxtaposing old and new, reinterpretation of local typologies, and a desire to celebrate and even elevate the mundane, the everyday, and the ordinary. So when we talk about urban issues, what are we dealing with here? I want to show you images of Jiazhanghe, which I find very interesting. But that image, as beautiful as it is, and the film is beautiful, actually speaks to a deeper concern, because between 2000 to 2010, urban land expanded by 83% and urban population grew by 45%. In fact, from 2010 to 2020, it probably grew even more and a lot faster. So in 2020, 60% of China's population are now living in urban areas. That is approximately 84 million people, if you think of China's population being 1.4 billion, about 3 times larger than the US population. So with urbanization changing the landscape of city and altering the texture of daily life, you can see there's a photograph, which is very beautiful in Chongqing. It gives rise to this notion of urban leisure, which is what happened over the weekend. Think about having picnic under this super crazy highway above you. On top of that, there are rural issues, which is disappearing village culture. So between 2000 to 2010, the same set of period when urban condition was expanding, the number of villages dropped from 3.7 million to 2.6 million, an average of 300 villages lost per day. You can imagine that China's vernacular villages were formed based on kind of this Confucian family ideals. So when that happens, you can see the disintegration of a family unit. Government catalog of 9,700 deemed as buildings that's worth saving, or what they call intangible cultural heritage. Roughly 80% are rural, and yet most of the money are spent in the urban condition. Only 47% of rural migrants are willing to return to their farms. Only 3% among those born after 1990, and forget the millennials, it's about 1%. So the empty stools in there depicts, in the rural area, depicts empty chairs representing an absent family member who has left the village to pursue opportunities in urban centers. It is with this that when we started practice in China, I'm going to show you an old project and a newer project. This was one of the project that was given to us. And obviously, when you saw that, a rather derelict building, that was perhaps one of our first architectural project about 15 years ago. We were doing mostly interiors then. And so you can imagine when this project was offered to us about 13 years ago as an opportunity to recycle, for a lack of better word, we were ecstatic, right? No one was giving us any building. So this was in many ways our first architectural project. So you can kind of see this project by the Cool Docks on the South Bund district of Shanghai. It's called Waterhouse. It's a 4-story, 19-room boutique hotel built into an existing 3-story Japanese Army headquarters building from the 1930s. This hotel fronts the Huangpu River and looks across the gleaming Putong skyline, which is about the future. And here it resonates. We start dealing with the idea of old and new, public and private, and making sure that the notion of this patina, taking advantage of this blurring and this patina of the existing structure. So you kind of see the notion, even rooms that look into the check-in counter, looking into the private rooms. We're taking advantage to maximize every space and every facet of this project. I'm trying to show you sort of sectionally what happened in this context. And so some of the existing stairway and condition, if you see the section, were kept. Rooms we're taking advantage wherein we actually have slit, and the sectional quality of the spaces were done and kept in ways that preservation was not seen in China before. Just because it was dilapidated or not considered listed, it was deemed okay to demolish. Well, we took a different approach to preservation, that perhaps buildings that are not historically significant could be potentially be recycled. So in this particular project, you can kind of see sort of this consideration. We have this small film. I'm probably going to cut short this film because I have another project to show you that deals with the rural issue. So we start filming our work, give you an idea of those of you that have not had an opportunity to come to Asia or Shanghai specifically. We started filming our project. So in lieu of experiencing the space, which is obviously the best, probably not as good, but better than just looking at it from a drawing point of view. We also recycled all the roof, all the leftover wood, timber in the building, and recreated louvers and apparatus and aperture for all the windows. In most cases in China, where developers like things that are blingy, this client didn't really have much money, so this was a perfect opportunity for us to actually use what was existing as a way to express our intent. So due to time, I'm not going to finish that film. Later I can share with you. The second one deals with a project in the rural area. This is a project which was interesting. The client came to us and his argument was that most of the cultural buildings that are preserved are in major cities. And therefore he argues, and he took about 10 properties outside of major cities, and this one is in Yangzhou, scenic, slender Westlake, and he argues that these cultural heritage sites needs to be preserved as well, are equally important for the livelihood of the villages. So we were given the design brief called for the adaptive reuse of several of the old buildings, or this was mandated by the government. Strangely enough, these buildings, quite frankly, were not worth preserving. It was a ruin to a certain extent, and you can kind of see this dilapidated site plan. So what we did was we went to the old city of Yangzhou and actually look at the grid of the city and created a sort of a new plan, a new format that starts to bring about that typology that was reminiscent of the city itself. So the village typology, these were traditional clusters of courtyards, and some hybrid transformation through the years resulted from functional variation. So we found this very interesting from studying the courtyard in the city. They give hierarchy to the spaces, they create vistas, frame views of the sky and earth. They also encapsulate landscape into architecture, often blurs the relationship of exterior and the interior in strange but interesting ways. So you see this from an aerial point of view. This was photographed 2 years ago. You see the clear orthogonal orientation. The planning department mandated that we only build on the existing footprint. So as a strategy, we form covered walkways, alleys to organize zones, to guide circulation, and also to define and wrap the buildings within. The adjacent ponds and waterway became part of the total landscape. So we were able to borrow views way beyond the perimeter wall. So in the courtyard within the water, there is this sunken seating as part of the landscape. As you know, part of the existing building, the walkways, recycled bricks from 3 different villages. So you can walk around the site using the pathway to discover your rooms. Once within, there's a clear separation between the buildings and the walls, and the layering of privacy in a sliver of landscape for guests to enjoy. Other courtyards are unoccupied, pocket of lush garden to offer relief from the sense of enclosure. So you see these moments, and yet you journey along the walls. You mark your experience by engaging with the varying sight lines, sensing different kind of horizons and datum lines. You can also ascend through the openings above to gain privileged viewpoints that look out across the gridded landscape and beyond to the surrounding lakes, specifically the lake that is what's called the Slender Lake, Silver Lake. So we have a small video that's about 40 seconds. So I'm just gonna quickly show you so you can understand the context. Sorry about that. Thank you. Sorry, that was rather rushed, but thank you.
Thank you, Lyndon and Lee. Beautiful presentation. Hi, everyone. Vanessa. Still a bit starstruck with all the panelists, but I was trying to be quick. So if I'm stuttering a little bit, please excuse me. Thank you, Dean Curry, and everyone for the kind invitation. Better get started because we have just 7 minutes. So today I'm going to focus on one of the projects that I proudly call my baby, the Mills, which is in Hong Kong. It was the original building and location of where my grandfather started his business in Hong Kong, which is now pivoted since the 80s into a real estate development company. But he started when he came to Hong Kong in the 50s. He came and started this textile factory, which I'll show you some of the pictures back in the days in the 50s. With all the workers. Is a very symbolic industry that actually brought Hong Kong into its economic status and put Hong Kong in the map today. when I joined the family company in 2010, I found out that the textile mills is still in its original location, as you see here. It was used as a warehouse space, and it was also the 60th anniversary of the company, and many of us actually didn't know that we started as a textile factory, and so I thought that it would be quite meaningful to revitalize this space into something that can inspire upcoming generation um, about about anything they feel passionate about in achieving, and while um, paying homage to our roots. So some pictures in the making. We were very lucky that even before we started refurbishing or renovating the building, one of the Portuguese famous Portuguese wall artist Bills came to do a piece of artwork, actually 4 pieces of artwork, which help us like start engaging with the community in terms of art and getting attention with the neighborhood, working with our neighbors to realize this project to make it into a more meaningful space. We carved out 3 of the floors to build a 3-story high skylight space. That's how it's been opened up. And then became the rebirth of what some of the artwork we still kept. This is what it looks like right before the opening of the space. The roof has been converted into quite a simple open space, which now turned into an oasis in such an industrial zone. We opened up one of the walls and turned it into more of a glass facade and added some balconies for a co-working space. And we also have built 4 glass bridges to connect the 3 buildings. This is the skylight internal space, and how we filled the space with content even during construction. And the programming of the complex is grouped into these 3 pillars, we call it, which I'll go through briefly. First one is the Mills Fabrica. It's an innovation ecosystem platform builder that we now call it Tech Style. It's a play on the theme textile. We do incubation, co-working. We have a prototyping lab space, also a retail shop for many of the startups to test their concepts. We do social design competitions. This is part of some activities and workshops we run for industry and for people outside of industry, even for kids. The second pillar is Center for Heritage Arts and Textile, nickname CHAT. It's the museum spot, which actually originally was going to be 100% museum for this whole Mills complex, but everyone knows museums not easy to operate, and it doesn't present really quite an attractive business model for management to approve this project. So, but it's the heart of the project. So this is the permanent gallery where we showcase the history, textile industry history. We have workshops with all of the artists and collaborators we work with. Community co-creation, co-curation, and co-learning are 3 core values that hold true in any of the exhibitions and workshops we do. We use a lot of upcycled and donated materials and get community involved to do artwork with us. This is a recent piece of larger scale kind of furniture, movable furniture piece for people to play around that's been displayed. We also try to introduce the textile history through AR, VR experience. And the third component is the Mills shop floor. As I mentioned earlier, it's still in the very industrial zone in Hong Kong. And to get people to come, it has to be worthwhile for them to stay for the whole day. And so we filled a big portion of the space with also entertainment, F&B, and shops that are all local Hong Kong brands. Also do lots of exhibitions that talk about other parts of daily lives in Hong Kong. This is an old textbook exhibition that we've done. We've also done something more that was transcended and inspired by this space. This is a photography exhibition by a Buddhist monk, and also, of course, music. At the end of the day, like what we've done at heart through the mills, we've developed and rediscovered the mills, the core value, which is putting people at first for Nan Fung. And we've taken the mills spirit to a different level, to the whole group now. We practice, put it in a campaign that called In Time Of, which we just started last year. It's the meaning of this social innovation campaign is to get, again, another way to engage community, to drive value, and at the end of the day, resiliency for each individual, cities and companies and or whatever it may be. Some pictures to show examples of community initiatives. These are furniture knitted by the community with the artists putting together, and then we turned it into a performance. Other ones are about local farming to dyeing, things that can touch upon everyone's daily lives. Mapping of local cotton tree that we're not allowed to grow anymore in the city. Urban farming campaigns to get to get children and everyone to understand how food comes. And also we're initiating the neighborhood farmers market, which is the very first one in this district in Hong Kong that we've done last month. As Dean Curry posed some questions for us, we're not a charity. This is not CSR. And what we're building upon is a shared value business model. Some numbers for all you who are interested in. We're trying to showcase these business like impact numbers and help it become a platform to bridge all the different NGOs, state stakeholders, underprivileged people are in need, people are interested in or have no idea in how to give back to community, to play a piece and play a part with us. We invite everyone to join, and we never do anything exclusively with a partner. Some of these are, you can see a great range from schools to kids organizations to big corporates to charities. We work with everyone to accelerate this kind of social innovation with us. Finally, we're very happy to announce that as of 2.5 weeks ago, we opened Mills Fabrica UK in King's Cross. We took over yet another historical building called Cotton House and converted it into another lab and co-working space to expand our ecosystem builder mission. This is the Textile X store we've opened, showcasing 100% upcycled shoes. It's also for sale. Vertical farms and alternative dyeing methods, that some of them of which are done by our portfolio companies, engaging local artists in upcycling furniture. And yeah, I think I'll keep it short, and if you guys have any questions or would like to see more about the project and other programs that we do, I'm happy to show you guys, but time's up. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Good seeing you online. So let me share with you very quickly. I have quite a few slides, but let me just start. Okay, so wait, hold on. Can I do the next? Okay, so I think the topic of urbanization, where Milton and Neri already talked about. So, and it's something that is going on quite rapidly over the years, and particularly the last 10 years. This is a very quick conversation on the number of sort of top 10 megacities that we have nowadays in the world. And by 2030, mega cities over 10 million people are expanding quite quickly from 33 to 43. This is the chart that I think Milton was referring to. The bottom axis is a number of years. On the right-hand side is percentage of urbanization. As you can see, I would like to pick out China, where in year 2000, they're about 50%. And by 2050 odds, will be close to 70%. So you can see the population will be growing from 50% to 70% sort of upswing urbanization quite quickly. You look at other places in the world, like US and Brazil, and all those basically developed Western Europe, all the developed country, 70% is basically the basic where majority of people tends to live in urbanized situations. So as you can see, China and if you look into China, we basically have 1.3 billion people. This is a very simple number. So times 20% of Chinese people moving from rural to city, that equates to about 276 million people that will be moving from China to from town to city. So that's 80% of the United States population. So you can imagine the number of people migrating to the city, and a large number of people, millions of people will be living in these new cities. So when you deal with urbanization, there are basically 5 key areas that I think is quite important. Sustainability is an issue. Mobility is important because the way the cities are designed in the last 50, 60 years. And then resiliency as climate change, how can we deal with bigger storm, more rainfall, floods and drought? And then on the civic and culture side, and also the diversity and equality issues dealing with the city. A lot of you guys study, this in the 1930s, 20s. Le Corbusier mentioned these sort of radiant city mobility given strategies, and see the images on the right. I think we all agree from today's perspective, these urban design is actually problematic. Unfortunately or fortunately, the Europeans, where Le Corbusier stormed this idea, never really adopted this concept, but the United States and it's adopted this concept. So mobility, where vehicular highway transportation starts to dominate the landscape, and the urban space of people spaces start to become secondary in this design. So LA, you guys are very familiar with this sort of mega highway structure. And when China, the way that LA grew is very much because of the mobility of the highway system. And this sort of urban planning have created quite a bit of an issue. As you know, China adopted similar issue, but with a problem with when China's population is so high, this is not the right direction, not only from an urban sort of quality of life perspective, but also from a carbon footprint sustainability perspective, using sort of traditional vehicular transportation. It's causing a lot of problem. This graph is quite interesting. LA is on the left-hand side. On the vertical axis is the amount of petroleum you use, and the bottom is basically a density. You can also interpret this as a carbon footprint. So as you can see, LA's carbon footprint is quite high per person per hectare, where Hong Kong is actually very low. So how did Hong Kong achieve such sort of basically a world leader position? It's basically we have a whole infrastructure that is related to basically underground train or the subway system. This is a graph on the right-hand side showing the urban density along these major transit routes and transit hubs. So we can see population tends to gather around this and seems to be a very efficient mobility and sustainable sort of proposition. And from a time perspective, we also feel that you can actually, by having certainty and predictability of your traveling time, you can plan your life better and have more free time for your own. So just a very basic number, we believe that just same lifestyle, living in LA and Hong Kong, spending less time on the road gives you at least 3 hours more every day to enjoy. When you talk about high density or hyper density, this is the tradition of Hong Kong mixed-use development. In the old days, it's the bottom it's in the 50s is commercial and the top is where people live. As that developed to where the 90s or even now, where the commercial and the living is still the same sort of bottom model, it's hyperized. So hyper tower, hyper podium sort of arrangements. Now I'll bring you to a project that I'm doing in Shanghai. It is under construction. This is one of the first major, what we call TOD, which is a transport-oriented development project in Shanghai. On the left-hand side, you can see is all residential. On the right-hand side, there's a shopping mall, there's hotel, office. All these projects, this is built over an interchange of two subway lines. So basically over almost 500,000 people transit through the space every day. And from the section, you can see there's 7 live train tracks. The subway is built into the mall, and the mall is crossing between two sides of the town. And so people can live and work and go through the city and live in this sort of hyperdensity, but in a very holistic way. So they don't just work there or live there, they entertain there, they work there, they live there, they shop there, they have schools, they have other urban facilities along that line. So I'll quickly go through this. So when we talk about high density, this is another project we're doing in Situ Center, which is a theater in Hong Kong for Chinese opera. As a building, the way we designed the building is we lifted up the theater to the 6th floor. So once again, we're stacking up the building by putting the theater up on top. But what happened is we created this beautiful underbelly public space that is weather protected. And this sort of, vertically stacking things offer us a lot of opportunity to create a beautiful urban environment that are publicly engaging. So this public piazza we create, people would hang out here during the day, but also there'll be some performances happening here as well. So how we stack things up, this sort of strategy on a high density environment tends to work sort of developing vertically. This is the interior of the theater from standing from the stage perspective looking in. Another challenge that we are facing in the modern world is aging population. So how can we deal with, in a high density environment, how can we deal with the notion of elderly who loves to live on their own because it has sense of dignity, which is important. They want independence. They want to be in a community, but at the same time, they also want to be close to the family. So in a high density environment, what can we do? So in this project, it's kind of quite simple. What's on top are basically apartments, whether some are independent living, some are assisted living, and some are actually just for the family member. And the bottom, where the purple part is what we call dependent living or elderly hub, where elderly that need some help can live there. So you can imagine also on top of the purple part, that's where all the other people can live. So the concept is basically, if you imagine having a family unit where Lyndon talked about the breakdown of the nuclear family, where the grandparents can live either on the assistant or independent living on the side. As they get older, they move to the bottom part where there's more dependent living units and where their family member can live upstairs. So they're still within the same block, they're still a community, but offering some assisted living along the way. So these assisted living apartment, you can see the way we design it is very elderly friendly, where it's wheelchair compatible. So daytime they can be, when they're healthy, they can still live in the same apartment. As they get older, transitioning into wheelchair assisted living, they still can live on their own. So the way we design the bathroom, the way we design even from the elevator perspective, we design a larger elevator where in case of emergency, the flat bed that goes straight to the ambulance can go straight to the apartment. So these are some of the detail that we have designed through to make sure that as people get older, they can live transitioning from sort of their home, and then they don't have to leave their home. Ultimately, it's about being comfortable in the places they can grow old. Even as simple as where the plug-in, the electric socket plug, we don't put it on the ground, we put it 1.1 meter up high so that on wheelchair, they can plug those things. So a lot of small details that we design to enable one can sort of transition from healthy to elderly, but keeping the dignity, and they don't have to move them to an elderly home, then continue to live in the space that they grow old with. This is another project that we are doing in the sort of less urban, more rural area in China, in a city called Guilin. And here you would imagine that this is actually a factory. This factory is designed for a textile company, garment company, that they want to move towards Industrial 4.0, where the new technology will be employed, and the future factory workers are not your traditional blue collar, but university graduates that actually talk to machine, and the machine produces the product. So we want to create an environment that is not only sustainable, but culturally relevant. So all the material here we adopted, we use within the local area that we sourced, all the brickwork, and the way we want to borrow the view from Guilin, which is famous for their natural landscape, into a lot of green space in between the buildings. We also created a water body where this site used to be a brick factory. And so those holes, they dig out the clay, we convert them into a sort of large water body to allow migrational birds to come through, allow a wider biodiversity to take place in this project. So you can see that the material that we use, the brickwork, is all from the local area, and now they all moved in. So the environment is actually quite welcoming and quite happy. So I'll just run through this very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Well, first of all, thank you, Dean Curry, for having me here today. I think it's very timely to have this Asia Cities initial talk. I believe when it comes to the built environment, the world needs Asia to get it right. So next page, please. Why the world needs Asia to get it right? Because we all know that our world is reaching a critical inflection, a point where too many people and too little resources threaten our survival. Next page. I think both Dean Curry and Brian O mentioned about the increase of our population. By the year 2050, the world's population will reach 9.7 billion, increase of 62% from today. And by 2050, the world's urban population will grow 146%. Next page. Yeah, and then and for Asia, a stunning 223%. There'll be more people living in cities in Asia than in cities across the rest of the world combined. So our people and our planet are under severe pressures, especially in Asia. We're already facing chronic shortages. Next page. Of food, water, and other vital resources. Our efforts to meet needs today could threaten longer-term security of supply. Next page. And escalate acute impacts, such as natural disasters, and then that we already experience around the world. Next page. So, given this situation, what is the best way forward? Clearly, next page, we have to balance immediate and long-term needs. Next one. We have to redefine sustainability for our future. And next one. And put ideas into action. That's the most important part. Next page. Yeah. So in terms of redefine the sustainability, we have to go beyond greens, and to include dimensions such as resiliencies, connectivities, productivity, and authenticity. And we must anticipate and harmonize the future needs of our people and our planet. Next page. So let's start with the resiliencies. Going forward, how can we use less to provide more? Next one. Next one. So I think there are three key areas. First is urban living, and then how can we provide self-sustaining housing? How can we design more flexible living space and introduce new concepts such as co-living? And then next, we need to look at the physical, go back, would you? Yeah, okay. Let's look at physical well-being and safety. What critical public infrastructure is needed, and how can we design them to be multi-purpose public realms and provide more smart homes. The third is environment protection. We need to protect local biodiversity, and we need to improve the quality of our water, earth, and air, and we need to have cross-border governance systems. Next. Sustainability is also about connectivity. More people in Asia have mobile phones than in the rest of the world. How can we convert this into integrated mobility that positively transform life and our planet? First, let's look at physical connectivity. How can we provide more integrated multimodal transportation systems and build in flexibility to accommodate future forms of transportations and supplying energy to vehicles? The second is how might we leverage digital connectivity to support a more sustainable built environment? And what new potential can a truly integrated approach of physical and digital? Next. Let's also look at productivity. In many countries like Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia, 145 hours per person each year is lost to traffic jams. And then how do we turn this 10% of the GDP lost into growth and a better life? What can we do with residential, next page, yeah, and commercial and communal? So when we talk about vertical, it's not only above, how do we use below ground spaces? Next, please. The fourth cornerstone is authenticity. Of the world's 100 largest shopping malls, 44 are in Asia. How do we preserve, create, and capitalize on the city's uniqueness? So there are three key elements to authenticity. I think the first is heritage. We need to preserve it, to revitalize it, keep it relevant for future generations. You have seen the work done by Lyndon and Vanessa. They're very, very important work in our urban fabrics. The same applies to the natural environment as well. So how can we help cities to conserve and restore biodiversity and reconnect citizens with the natural heritage? And finally, how do we cultivate creativities? I strongly believe creativity is essential to the city's differentiations. That's many of our architects are making an effort to transform our community and cities through our creativities. And how do we ensure the built environment celebrates and nurtures diversity of communities, the diversity of our cultures and our talents, and also connect them to give citizens a collective identity. Next, please. So I think this is a very critical time for imagining and delivering a new solutions. It's on us to think further, bolder and more integrated. So together we can reimagine how buildings and our communities own, zone, and use space, and expand the concept of implementation. Next, please. So let me conclude at this point. Asia's phenomena, urbanization, is why the world needs Asia to get it right. We as professional for the built environment, we can and we should play a key role in helping Asia to get it right, because I believe if Asia gets it right, the world will be all right. So thank you again for having me today.
Thank you all. Those are both provocative and timely comments by Sean and all of you. And I want to start by just celebrating the diversity and deep thinking that you're engaged in each of your projects. And maybe just start by asking a question that's relevant to the specific time we're in this kind of pandemic. How do you think about the kind of work that you're all engaged in terms of generate the difference in generational expectations? The millennials and the aging populations that were discussed in many presentations in different areas of China represent very different kinds of generational expectations given where their parents were living, what their parents are doing, what they expect to be doing, and how they're kind of developing their own entry points into cultural production. So that's one question that links to another one, which is related, which is the future of work. In the rural to urban migration and in the migration within urban areas, what is the expectation that you have from both the architectural and urban development perspective and real estate perspective on how questions about the future of work play into those kinds of differences in generational expectations?
Maybe we can start. I can start first because as you all know, that we have a very large global footprint. So my answer is really related to, I think different countries, different situations. For example, where I'm living right now is Hong Kong. Hong Kong basically is went back to normal. Most of the office are reopened and people are working in the office, but even like our office in LA, we have two major offices in LA. The downtown office is completely empty right now. I was there a few weeks ago, and then only the entire floor only have 6-7 people. But our office in Orange County came back about 30%. It's roughly about 50 people working in the office. So people have a different mindset about particularly the distance from your home to your work environment. And unavoidably, particularly in lower density countries or cities, working from home is probably become much more a preferred style. But in a higher density country, for example, in Hong Kong or in our colleagues in India, people actually still prefer working in the office because their home footprint is much smaller, tighter, and it was very kind of uncomfortable or inconvenient to work from home. But unavoidably, again, we're also reducing our office space in Hong Kong to give people much more flexibility, particularly for younger generations. They probably, a lot of them live by themselves. They're very comfortable using digital tools, and then, there's so many kind of softwares these days. You can conduct a workshop, I don't know if like a Miro, people using different software to overcome the physical kind of contact as we used to work before. So I think a digital tool become more and more important. People are much more willing to give a try from a company employer point of view or employee point of view. And we even have people not in that city, but work for that city. For example, people moved out from LA because the real estate is so expensive, and they move to Oregon or move to Texas, work, they're willing to, some of them willing to overcome the time zone differences, but, continuously be part of the team to contribute the workforce to the company. So I think it really varies, depends, but in general, the future, the flexibility becomes much more important, and then the tool we're going to be relies on probably be even more important for us to apply. Yeah, that's my quick answer.
I'll follow up with Sean comments. I think work in itself, every industry, I think the work, how we work is very different. So as what Sean is saying, the Hong Kong office is, they have relieved some space. I just took up some extra space from my office. So I guess what I realized through this whole pandemic is, as the architectural firm, it's very hard to work from home. I think the creative process requires really a face-to-face when you can fully express. And I think as we communicate, I think that not only voice and sound, but touch and the conversation needs to be sort of spontaneous than sometimes, technical issues and I can't hear it clearly, low bandwidth, that sort of thing. So it's important to understand that. I think creative work and not creative work, not just by industry, but when you are thinking of ideas, brainstorming, workshop, face-to-face is unavoidable. So I think it really depends on the nature of work. A lot of my bank's friends, they are working from home, and they seem to be doing very well working from home. So maybe they get paid more, so their apartment's bigger. So, but anyway, it's just, I think the nature of work is different. So every industry have to look at themselves and see their workspace mixture. So I anticipate some industry where traditionally 70% maybe is all workstation and 30% is public or engagement creative space. I think that ratio will be flipped in some industries. So they just come in for a workshop and then they go home Tuesday and Wednesday, right? So I think that in itself is quite different. So just want to supplement on that.
Great. Let me ask from the standpoint of financing these projects and responding to forces within the market. I want to ask Vanessa and Lyndon and others, particularly let's start with Vanessa. The amazing project of the Mills is, you said in your last slide, it's not just a philanthropic project, but it seems like the capital stack there would be fairly complicated in terms of the diversity of tenants, the diversity of revenue sources. How do you, and you've exported that to kind of the project in London. I'm wondering, could you just fill out kind of how you're able to combine such different uses with a massive kind of revitalization project that the expense of renovation and restoration. How did you accomplish that, and is it a model that that you're looking to replicate?
It's still very, to be very frank, the whole business model is not something that's super rosy, as you can tell. We've really bootstrapped for in terms of the construction cost, but because given the building wasn't meant to be built for like over 50 years, there were lots of structural and like concrete spalling issues that ended up reinforcement, like just making the building safe became the priority rather than making it pretty. And we, in terms of running this whole different mix, actually one of the primary objective, as you rightly point out, so in the last question, is to how to bridge different generations. As with technology and like all these digital communication, people just start to lose touch and forget how important being with each other is. Our project opened at kind of an unfortunate time. Like soon after it opened, it was the social unrest in Hong Kong, then it's COVID, which all of them kind of make us appreciate how like gathering or being together is good. So in that aspect, it actually brought the community together whenever we're allowed to do community events, and all of our events we collaborate with, because the whole project is textile themed, but actually in the firm, only one person was left from the textile industry. I wasn't even trained in fashion or textile or whatever. So the whole thing was about outreaching and coming together and sharing ideas. And so bridging the gap to coming into a common goal and building something meaningful is, I think, one way to fill up the space. And the business model, we've just finished the first round of kind of leasing cycle. A lot of them, some of the tenants we've graduated into like more popular or expensive retail locations, while some realize that they're not actual retailers and they should be like just an online retailer. So a lot of that we've become not just a landlord-tenant relationship, but actually test out different models, newer leasing models with our tenants as well, and how to enhance these experience through like across 3 to 4 generations.
Are you taking equity in some of those businesses that you helped launch, or?
No.
Okay.
But in terms of for companies and startups in Fabrica space, some of them are incubatees of ours, but we don't necessarily invest. So for each company, we have a very customized or personalized approach, because depending on their stage and their needs.
Thank you.
I think Milton, what your question is quite interesting, because for the longest time, Asia as a region, and maybe China specifically, is very much referential to Europe and America. So if you have a client that comes, they would use this tagline: "Is this the LVMH of architecture? Does this look like the Cartier building? Can you tell me what this program looked like? Is it going to be like MoMA? Is it going to be like Victoria Albert?" Right? So there's always, and it frustrates the hell out of me because there's a lot of good things here. In fact, I was just in Sanxi and I saw a number of Ming Dynasty building, and it's amazing sectionally, and I call it the Renaissance of China. And of course, the Japanese are very good in taking this building and have a number of them in Nara. And all of a sudden, it is considered Japanese architecture. And here I'm not trying to be political, but all I'm saying is that there's not enough respect within the culture itself, and there's that need for referencing. And so what this pandemic did was it forced people, when they can't travel, they have to start going to little inns, little places outside of the city that is within not just their means. Obviously, a lot of Chinese individuals can afford it, but then they're forced to look inward. I don't think forever it's a good thing. I think the exchange is important, but I think it's good to always be able to look in order to appreciate what you have. And by virtue of that, you also understand that there's the possibility, I think Sean called it, right? If Asia can't get it right, we will not be all right. So I like that tagline. I'm gonna use that, Sean, for my next pitch. I think that's gonna work very well. But I remember Waterhouse when it was got built, the government official came. They were not very happy. They came to me and they thought it was a practical joke that half the building was not finished. Even my mom said, asked me two questions, goes, Lyndon, is this finished? I said, yes, it is finished. And the second question was, did the client pay you? So even my own mother decided. So her answer was, either your client's really stupid or you're just absolutely brilliant. But both of them were not true. And it took 2 years when David Beckham actually stayed in Waterhouse. Did the Board of Tourism decide, goes, oh, maybe there is something great about this. And it was 2 years later, after losing 3 projects because of the project I did, it was put on the cover of Shanghai Tourism Board. And to a lot of people, that became a seal of approval because a famous footballer decided that it was deemed worthy.
Well, I think there's something in, thank you for that. I think there's something in the way that you and Lee described the way that you're working, the process that you're using, which is there's a poetics there about thinking of local and thinking authentically about local uses and cultures. Relate that for our audience to the kind of authenticity that Sean talked about in terms of a way forward. And I'm thinking about situations in where you have to, there is more of a tabula rasa situation where you have to really begin to make or insinuate or transplant or appropriate culture from existing rural to an urban context, or from one context to another, where you're like you were showing, Lyndon, scanning the landscape for cultural institutions to see, what are we plugging into, at least phenomenologically, as a kind of movement through the city, and kind of one's own mental map of cultural artifacts, of places to go, of linking into that kind of phenomenological system. So I wonder, Lee, Lyndon, and Sean, if you could talk about notions of authenticity that come from existing or have to be invented, and the tropes that you see in trying to do that in a way that's convincing and architecturally compelling, particularly in areas where you have more of a tabula rasa situation. Lee, do you want to start?
Hi. Well, the presentation I made was specifically trying to address one of your topic, creator economy or creative economy. The point I was trying to make is that it is very important to think about the creation before the creation, which also address the idea of the authenticity. I'm interested in that to question what is the thing. Architects so often was making a form, giving a form, its manifestation to the thing. But I think before trying to do that, more importantly is what's the thing you're trying to make, or what's the thing's about? What is the museum today is about, and how does museum works? What's the theater? How can theater work? And what's a library? Because so often, as Linda mentioned, everything is referential to Europe and America, which is also true. The ideas, the very original prototype of all these cultural institutions, even down to universities, campus, even the classroom, is imported to Asia, to China. We didn't have theater the way it is now. But that's the thing imported as the way it is, or it was, and as how it works in Europe or in the States, work in China. But that is a fundamental question. And most often than not, it does not work. Like, for instance, let's talk about art museums. Museums are built all over China, art museums, probably by 1,000 a year. I'm not exaggerating, hundreds a year at least. But most of the things are called museums, not a museum we know from the past, and there's no collection. And is it a gallery? Is it exhibition space? It's often somewhere in between. So I think this there's urgency to rethink all these adopted prototypes, and it's a perfect opportunity in China because we are building in Asia that we're building from tabula rasa, but tabula rasa not just physically, but also contents-wise, creating things. And it's a great opportunity to reinvent how this thing works. And that is more, as I mentioned, more inclusive. It's no longer for some people, but for all. And how to engage people, and how to even embrace all these new forms of art, new forms of ideas, and what's interesting, you can see there's emergent forms of bookstores, which function more like a library, or a library more like bookstores. So what's the library in the future? And how do we balance the emerging digital books and the printed books? All these things, I think to me, the most exciting things even, so the form before the form, the design before the design, that I think would perhaps is where we can make some breakthroughs. And so in the future, decades later, there'll be reference made to Asia, to China, say, here, this is actually how we do a museum. This works better.
Quickly, but thank you, Vanessa. I know that you may have to leave in a few moments. So any closing comments from you?
No, I don't want to interrupt and keep going on, and reach out anytime. Thank you so much again for the opportunity. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Lee, I wonder, just before opening up to everybody, what you brought up is maybe the referencing to kind of flip that or invert that is to not maybe think about the referencing, kind of transplanting one reference to another, but thinking about how, because of the massive transformation and history, massive current contemporary transformation of Asia and cities, and we've seen the diagrams and the numbers, there are emergent forms of sociality that don't yet have an architectural typology as a reference to plug into. In other words, that I think that one question is how are your processes of making architecture changing the way in which program begins to glue itself to certain architectural inventions in a way that is not presupposed. You know what I mean? So that, we were educated in the age of kind of typology, and a building fits into a certain typology. But when you talk about emerging forms of sociality that don't yet have the right typology referentially, whether it's Europe or Asia or whatever, because the contemporary moment is very different from 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Is that a place to start thinking more respectfully about cultural production in the architecture and urban space in Asia?
Certainly, yeah. Well, I think what's interesting, sometimes you are forced to create. So you need to feel the force. What I see particularly is that many of the commissions we face for the kind of complexity, the kind of scale and the density, you cannot even find the reference anymore. At that, what do? You have to make it up, make it something new. And I found perhaps not the old discussion about East and West. I start to see more similarity than differences. You know, if you think about the level, how people live, how people work in the connected world today, there's more similarities. On the level, the deep down level, the humanity, that we share more similarities. So I'm more interested in to think on that level that, but we're in the position to create, because we have two chance to build, and that you are in the position from the front line to do the things that we're asking for today, you know, that doesn't quite exist. And what is it? You know, I want to give another example I didn't show today, like schools. The schools being built in China massively, each one of them gigantic, that when we do our early research before we design, there is no reference. There's nobody in any other countries building school this scale for elementary school, for middle school. You know, 60 or 100,000 square meters of school on the dense campus doesn't quite exist. Then how does it really work? I think that's the most exciting part for architects today.
If I may piggyback on what Lee just said about school, I have a project that will be opening in a week's time. It's a school located in Shenzhen. It has kindergarten, so primary school, middle school, high school together in a vertically stacked building, very tight site. It has a dormitory on the side for students and teacher. And what's amazing is this school is located in Shenzhen in China, but will be teaching Hong Kong curriculum. And this project, believe it or not, it started a year ago as a conversation by government, and it's opening next week. The approval, the construction, it's all done within 9 months. And they're doing fit out, like non-fitting, they're laying out furniture as we speak, 24/7. And the school local regulation required the fire truck EVA access to be no more than 6th floor. What happened is they created a new rule that have a new datum, another ground plane that's high above, then they can do fire rescue. So they do a 14-story building. This sort of typology is not possible anywhere else, because somehow in China, when there is an urgent need, and the urgent need for this school is basically Hong Kong has 20,000 students that used to every day. The parents, they live in Shenzhen, they cross the border to go to school in Hong Kong. Since the pandemic, the border is closed. These kids has been 18 months without any schooling. So there's an urgency politically and social need. So the government got together and got the approval, got the land, and pushed everything done in a year. So this is a brand new typology from curriculum, from policy, from architecture, from urban, like regulatory school design. So I think this is what is happening in China, in a way, created this unique situation where there is an opportunity to create new typology, and the government will stand behind you if there's a justified social needs for it, and they break the rules, and they're okay to break these rules. So these sort of rapid changes happens a lot, and I think it is through this context that in China uniquely that they can do that. So there will be new typology, new social requirements due to technology interruption, climate interruption, and the political will that they can do these things. You can say without due process, but there's an urgent need for the community. They can go in and do it. So it's quite unique.
It's also a responsibility, however, having said that because there is a new set of typology, that it's not necessarily good. All I'm saying is that it's already out there. A lot of the hybrid structure and hybrid typology that both Brian and Liu who's talking about are already there, but because of the commercial pressure, they're built so fast and so badly. Oftentimes the good, talented students from some of these top schools look at it and go, I'm not gonna do that. You know, I'm not going to do a mall. I'm not going to do a hybrid Instagrammable space. It's not that it's bad. It's just badly designed because it's such a speed. So that's the reason why I applaud all these guys, because they actually took on. I mean, Liu is crazy. I mean, he builds building faster than I make furniture. So, and he builds it quite beautifully. So I really admire that. You know, his craziness, but. If you were to think, you know, whether you like Mies van der Rohe or not, when he left Germany, you have to remember all his colleagues from Walter Gropius to a number of people, Ulbrich even, criticize him because you're building an office tower for a rich individual, for Seagram building, and you know the rest is history, right? He completely changed the typology of what office tower is. And then he went and built Farnsworth House. And you imagine Walter Gropius rolling his eyes and saying, you're doing a private home, not a social housing, not a place for the public and the community. And then he changed the notion of what private house could potentially be. So I often challenge people that, you know, I always challenge Liu to design a karaoke bar. You know, oftentimes students say, oh, let's not design karaoke bar. You know, that's vile, that's just sinful. But imagine the new Mies van der Rohe on karaoke bar 30 years later, when people don't want to do museum but want to do karaoke bar because, you know, what maybe Bryant or Liu has done. So within that context, I think there's a lot of new typology coming in, but I think there's also bad ones, yeah, like the Instagrammable spaces that the client constantly asks us to do. Is this Instagrammable? And I think we just have to be very careful and hopefully nurture and educate them in the right way.
Well, I agree with Lyndon. I think the history is changing, and sometimes history kind of unveiled itself. And I think the major event or you know the overall situation has changed. You know, we talk about climate change, we talk about particularly the COVID. Life is no longer the same. It doesn't matter, you know, the COVID will be gone or not, maybe another year or maybe another 2 years, who knows? Nobody knows, you know. But I think life is no longer the same, you know. I mean, agree or not, you just have to accept this. And then the technology is no longer the same. The people understand about our living environment is different, and understand what's the culture is very different now. So I think we're as architect or the professional for the built environment, it's our responsibility to proactively to seek the future for our citizens. Yeah.
Thank you. I know, Sean, you may have to leave us as well,
Yeah.
but thank you for those comments. So yes, it does feel that existentially and globally, coming out of or at the tail end of or wherever we are in the pandemic, that the world is extremely different for every individual on an existential level. The climate, the precarity of the climate is palpable in our country, in your country, in the countries that you all represent. Social issues, social justice issues are palpable.
Yeah.
Everything seems to be, no pun intended, water, social issues, everything seems to be percolating to a kind of to the surface in a way. So I do feel that is our moment. I wanted to ask a question from the Q&A from one of our professors, Faiza Muatasim. And the question is, how can architecture bring culture into instantaneously urbanizing and modernizing regions in places like China, especially in those cities that are based on a displacement of existing communities and an erasure of their existing built environments? Anybody?
I'll have a chat.
Anybody want to take that one?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. How can architecture bring culture into instantaneously urbanizing and modernizing regions in places that many of you have described across China, especially in those cities that are based on a displacement of existing communities and at the same time an erasure of their built environments.
It's interesting you should bring this topic up because I'm teaching an option studio at the GSD, and the subject that we're engaging right now is called cultural tourism. And I'm still not sure, I'm on the fence here where I stand on this. There are a number of developers, very successful one, and both Li Hu and I are working with a number of them, have engaged on the idea of bringing a sort of a community together. You can kind of say it's a reinvented community. It could be a community of a place of refuge. Some of them are 3 hours away from Shanghai, 3 hours away from Beijing. And what they do is they create small spaces. Obviously, the bulk of their revenue is through housing. But then they would have a little museum, they would have a little chapel, they would have a library, they would have galleries. Basically, they infuse program in there and to bring younger people to come in. And so the wealthier individuals that buy this house feels that there's a sense of community, there's a sense of culture. So this whole cultural tourism to kind of raise revenue. You know, I used to have this disdain for that, but I do think that this sort of apparatus, a trope perhaps, from a developer's point of view, have some resonance because then the younger people start to appreciate, and there are real programs that are being brought in, and wealthier individuals that are often rich and with disassociated with culture start to see it as a need over the weekend that perhaps they need to educate their kids initially. And eventually start being involved in being, you know, because the fact that they have to bring either their grandchildren or their children themselves to be in good restaurants, to be in a museum that is run by UCCA, for instance. So I'm still not sure about this, Milton, but I find this kind of reinvigorating places that are desolate, or probably even towns that are already dead, or mega buildings or development that have stopped the last 12 years and now rejuvenating it by bringing in cultural program into development, and real program by introducing real program. You know, I think we've been fortunate enough to be in this time and in this place to actually use our knowledge and actually engage with the developer, because they realize that it's really beneficial. And so we've done a gallery, and now we're doing a number of other, you know, from chapel to museums for a number of developers with this same intent.
Okay.
Lyndon, the idea, I do question the idea of cultural tourism, if you know what I mean.
Yes. That's what I'm saying. I'm on the fence, Li Hu.
I must say the majority of the cultural tourism being developed across the country is very questionable. And more often than not, these are just gimmicks for real estate developments, for selling what's really behind it. I think what we really need now is authentic cultural spaces that are true public cultural spaces, you know, with sustainable programs that can run, you know, for the communities and for people around.
I agree, but also at the same time, if the government's not going to act on it, Li Hu, you have to realize if the government builds building with big museum and big museum names and only pay an amount of money to big institution, let's not name the names in the US and Europe, just to bring them in here so that they have this checkbox and says we've done the job, you know, then we should really support private developers who are actually taking the risk as well. Right, I'm on the fence on this, so that's why I can't really argue for it. But at the same time, if we can as a group actually create true cultural spaces and obviously engage and educate these developers, because you know the government is a behemoth and it's going to be hard to convince a bureaucracy, a group of people to do exactly what we want. But to a private developer, maybe easier.
But
Yeah,
isn't
that's always the hard challenge. What is the authenticity?
Yes.
True, it's very hard.
but isn't cultural sort of these significant places, the history of it, the narrative of it, right, gives its values. But the modern day context, you have to remember what China has done. I guess our conversation right now is really surrounding China, so I'm just going to focus on that. That China has grown itself in the last 30 years at a pace that had never been experienced anywhere else in the world. And there's a context of it, which is quite unique, is they went through, prior to that 30 years, so it's prior 1979 when China opened up, they went through a very long period of, sort of cleansing of history and culture through the Cultural Revolution. So in a way, they had even a cultural tabula rasa, a little bit. They're still trying to find their roots of what this new modern China is. And I think that's where we're at in a very interesting juncture, where now they have the resources in terms of financial resources. They have the will as a united, stabilized government, and they have a people that have created this huge middle class, very, very, very rich, but only one generation. Literally, these guys, my staff went from really growing up in a very old, rundown, without plumbing housing to where they are now, which is fresh, clean water, food, Walmart in 30 years or within their lifetime. So they're struggling. We all know they're struggling, but I think it's a really interesting opportunity where in technology, political will, and resources available to ask this question and what that culture will be. I think it's still in the making.
Mhm.
And I think, like Lyndon, and we are as architects, and we are responsible to shape that. And I think that discourse will continue. And every 100 things you do, you'll be, a lot of them will fail. This will just not going to work. But you find a few gems that will stay. And I think we need a little bit more time to let it brew and get the right stuff. But there'll be disaster bound to happen. But then one good thing about China, they can remove those very quickly and build new ones. So hopefully we can correct ourselves along the way to do better. But I think that's part of the experimentation, right? That we have to experience, because there isn't any there before us that we need to. And that's why we keep looking for Western references, because we don't know what the future is. And so we need to have the courage to do what's new and not copy.
On that note, thank you. I think fascinating conversation and points of connection between other conversations that we'll have during our public event series this semester, but also the ways in which at our school we're approaching again those connection points between kind of what is design excellence in the context of social impact, when different forms of sociality are informing the way that we design in ways that in ways in which it may necessitate a rethinking of the processes that we have used to make architecture, and the references and precedents that we use to think about what's appropriate in certain contexts, and also what's authentic or culturally appropriate in certain contexts. So I thank you for bringing those points very, very poignantly to the surface through the discussion and also your projects. You are now a part of our conversation around Asia cities that will continue and percolate, hopefully in very idiosyncratic ways that are institutionalized within our school in terms of research projects and student projects and studio work, and also work that we hope to do in partnership with you that might be very different kinds of things in terms of installations or producing things together, or thinking about how municipalities or cities are working on these issues. So I really look forward to you being a part of that if you're willing, and appreciate you being with us this evening. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Not every lecture is going to be 2 hours, but because we had such a thoughtful group of speakers, and it's more of a kind of a little mini symposium to start us off, we went a little bit longer, which is great. But please join us again next week and the week after and throughout the whole semester. So thank you and have a great evening.